Finish the job. Do what you have to do to bring about the regime change that will allow your children to sleep through the night. To the American people, wake up. Understand what we're fighting. The Ayatollah is not normal. These are not normal people. Stand with Israel. Standing with Israel, you're standing by you're helping your own self. You're helping your own families. I'll make a prediction. Israel's going to win, and this regime's going to fall. This regime's going to fall of its own weight.
Neocons and their elite banking buddies are pushing for endless wars while profiting off of the misery of hardworking Americans. This isn't about geopolitics for them. It's about a rigged system that's bleeding our country dry. These Washington insiders have never met a war they didn't like. These are the folks who've been beating the drums for military interventions in, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and now they're eyeing places like Iran and China. Now, they'll tell you it's all about spreading democracy or national security, but for many of these people, this is just a hustle that keeps the war machine humming and their bank accounts growing. When a neocon politician or think tank pundit pushes for another war, they're looking for a paycheck, board seats, consulting gigs, stock options are the rewards for keeping the world on fire. But it's not just the defense contractors cashing in. The real puppet masters are the elite banking establishments. These are the Wall Street titans, the global financial institutions that fund the wars and then profit from the chaos. When the U.S. drops billions in a new military campaign, that money often comes from debt. So our government borrows from these banks and they rake in interest payments while we, the taxpayers, foot the bill. Trillions of dollars in debt from decades of war. And who's getting rich? Not you, not me. It's the bankers. And here's where it gets even uglier. These same banks that profit from war are also screwing over everyday Americans with predatory loans. Now, think about it. The same elite institutions that finance wars are the ones locking Americans into financial slavery. So they're playing both sides, funding the bombs abroad and skyrocketing interest rates and loans at home. So your tax dollars pay for their wars and your mortgage payments line their pockets. It's the very definition of a rigged game. And the neocons and the bankers are the house. They always win. Let's talk about how this works. When the government ramps up for war, it needs cash and it needs it fast. So it issues treasury bonds, which are then snapped up by big banks and foreign investors. These banks lend the money to the government at a profit, and we're stuck paying the interest through our taxes. Meanwhile, defense stocks soar, and the neocons, with their hands in those companies, they make a killing. It's a perfect scam. Start a war, borrow the money, build the weapons, and then cash the checks. But the damage doesn't stop there. Wars destabilize economies, not just in far-off countries, but right here at home. Inflation spikes, gas prices soar, and the cost of living crushes the middle class. Think of the 2008 financial crisis. The banks bundled up toxic mortgages, sold them as, quote, investments, and then crashed the economy. And who paid the price? Who paid it? Main Street, right? Who got bailed out? Wall Street. And who was cheering for more wars while all this was happening? The neocons, because war distracts you from the fact that your life savings just basically vanished. So why do they get away with it? Well, largely because they control the narrative. The legacy media, owned by the same corporate elites, parrots the neocon line about fighting for freedom while ignoring the financial carnage here at home. Obviously, they're not going to be talking about the billions in profits they make or the families losing their homes due to bad fiscal policy. And if you dare question it, well, then they'll just call you a unpatriotic, conspiracy theorist, or nutcase. But here's the good news. We're waking up. Americans are fed up with endless wars and Wall Street's games. We're starting to see the connections and how the same elites who push for war are the ones keeping us in debt. So what can we do? What proactive measures can we take here? Well, joining us today is author and founder of Replace Your Mortgage, Michael Lush. Michael's a good friend of this channel. He's spent decades learning the best way to create your own parallel economy, and he's here to give us his insights and share how we can have true financial freedom. Click on the link in the description below to get started on that journey to paying off your mortgage. That's Michael's expertise. And that way you can create real passive income and set yourself free from these exploitive banks. Michael, welcome. Always great to see you again. It's been too long.
Yeah, it has been. I appreciate it, Steve.
Oh, it's great seeing you, man. So, I mean, you've been working with folks to break free from the financial trap set by these elite banks for years now. You're amazing. Can you walk us through what's really happening with this sort of rigged system? I shouldn't even say sort of, totally rigged system, tying war profits to predatory loans.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, as you perfectly laid out, I always thought of you as just an intellect when it came to politics and geography and history. But you know your thing about the banking industry, and you hit the nail on the head. Not to beat a dead horse, but when it comes to war profits in banking, it's intertwined. And there's several mechanisms, primarily driven by the financial sector, as you've laid out, and its role in funding wars, managing war-related debt, and profiting from economic activity surrounding the conflict after the war. So there's several factors when it comes to war financing and loans. You got governments that borrow heavily to fund the wars. Who are they borrowing from? Well, obviously they issue bonds, but they're also taking loans from banks. Give you an example. During it was World War I and II, actually. Banks like J.P. Morgan and Company underwrote government debt, so they would earn interest and fees off of that, and they would also fund our allies, especially in World War I. So they would profit from those loan arrangements and bond sales. One thing that you didn't mention is the military-industrial complex. Banks invest in those, so they'll take the profits from these loans and invest in other loans to the defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, et cetera. And so they see massive profits during these wars, and these firms rely on bank credit for the production. And then, as you mentioned, banks earn interest while holding the stock of these companies, benefiting from the price and shares of the price of the stock during these conflicts. So it is a never-ending cycle between banks, military-industrial complex, and then, quite frankly, you got your lobbyists and your politicians that are tied into that. You didn't mention, people like Dick Cheney and Halliburton. These policies are driven to hopefully escalate wars because they get rich from wars. War is very profitable for a lot of things.
Right. But at our expense. That's the sad thing, in every way imaginable, even lives, which is so horrific. I was going to ask you if you could develop a little bit of that, of how neocon insiders, you mentioned like Dick Cheney or Bill Kristol and the like, or Lindsey Graham, how those neocon insiders and Wall Street titans tend to collaborate to keep this war and debt machine running at the expense of everyday Americans.
Yeah, they want to perpetuate a war and debt cycle. And again, as you said, at the expense of everyday Americans who are really funding this with our tax dollars. So as I mentioned before, it operates through a mix of policy influence, financial mechanisms, and systemic self-interest, drawing on the context of war profits and banking exploitation that you've raised. Kind of give you an idea. It's embedded in think tanks, projects like New American Century or AEI. Government roles, they push for aggressive foreign policies that justify perpetual wars. You mentioned Paul, and you didn't mention John Bolton. He's another one, shaped interventions in Iraq, Afghanistan, and around the world. So these insiders frequently move between government, defense contractors, and Wall Street. So example, Goldman Sachs, executives like Robert Rubin, the Treasury Secretary under Clinton, Stephen Friedman, who was a Bush advisor. They influence fiscal policies that favor banks while aligning with neocon agendas. So this revolving door ensures that policies prioritize corporate and military interests over public welfare.
Yes. Yeah. And there's no oversight. That's what drives me crazy with it. Nobody in the media challenges them on it. I see Bolton all the time on CNN and MSNBC, just spewing all of his propaganda, just trying to get us in the next war. I mean, what are I guess I'm asking, how did we get here? It may be built into the whole, sort of Bretton Woods system, or even just the post-Fed system going all the way back to 1913. But what failures in oversight or policy just have allowed banks and neocons to come together and exploit taxpayers and homeowners unchecked for so long?
Yeah, I'll provide a little bit of pushback when it comes to just banks and the lenders being predatory. And I won't say pushback, maybe it's more of a bolt on. And it's not just the lenders and the banks being predatory with these loans. And I'm a big fan of deregulation.
Right.
But you'll have bills like the Dodd-Frank bill. It was designed to heavily regulate the lending and banking industry. And in doing so, their hope was to reduce the cost to the average American. However, now that we're almost 2 decades out, we now know what the result of that is. It actually increased the cost to the average American consumer. Now, having said that, I do think consumers need to weigh or have a way in this accountability as well. Just
Right.
because banks were offering loans that you qualify for, because it didn't take anything other than a fog up a mirror to qualify for, doesn't mean you had to take it.
Right. Granted. Yeah.
We've seen some of the movies that illustrate this perfectly. Dancers getting 3, 4 homes, right?
Right.
Well, just because you can qualify doesn't mean that you can actually afford those 3 and 4 homes. So I think we as American consumers also need to participate in that accountability too, not
Yes.
just the banks and lenders. But there is a way. We don't have to participate in that. And I think that's kind of what you're getting to.
Right. Right. Yeah, thank you for saying that. That's the hardest thing, to look in the mirror and say, how have I contributed to this? And we have. Well, there's no question. We thought we could benefit off of this cheap cash that they were throwing at us, and we helped contribute to the 2008 GFC. No question about it. So that's a perfect pivot. So how do we get out of that? Okay, we're all right. We contributed to that. We see it.
Yep.
So what can we do as patriots to sort of build our own financial independence, protect our families, so that we just don't get involved in this corrupt system anymore?
Yeah. And before I answer it, I want to kind of give a little bit more enlightenment of another layer deep. We talk about banks and lenders, but in my opinion, it goes further back than that, which would be the central banks, the Federal Reserve.
1913, right? Your favorite year, right?
Absolutely. Ever since also not just the central bank, but also taxation too, right?
Yes. Yeah. They had to pass a new constitutional amendment. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So what the Federal Reserve is a backstop to banks that allows banks to execute what's called fractional reserve lending. So instead of them having, for every dollar they had in a deposit, they could lend out $1 in loans. Now they can lend out 10, sometimes 15 times what they have in deposits, right? So I think this problem stems back to the central bank as well. But to answer your question directly, is we don't have to participate in it. There is an alternative strategy. There is alternative products that you can bypass the bank altogether to a certain degree. And let me explain what that means. For most Americans, they have a mortgage. And, if they've got a mortgage back in the COVID era, they probably still owe roughly the same amount as they did back in 2020 and 2021. Because mortgages are front loaded with interest. The first 5 years, predominantly interest only payments. And most Americans were teased by that low rate, the Fed reducing the interest rates, that they refinanced. Now, some of these Americans could have been 5, 10, 15, 20 years into their mortgage where they're actually starting to get traction to paying this thing off. And then they were teased by these low rates, starting the clock all over again. And now they're essentially in the interest only portion. When I say interest only, predominantly interest portion of this amortized debt. So there is an alternative tool. One that we like specifically is simple interest lines of credit. And people never think about that because we're told by some other financial entertainers that lines of credit are bad, right? You think of a credit card when you think of simple interest lines of credit. But in the banking standpoint, there's home equity lines of credit, there's personal lines of credit, there's business lines of credit. So when you have a simple interest line of credit, when you put money in, money goes to principal first, then interest is calculated. On mortgage debt, when you put money in, it goes to interest first, then your principal is calculated. So how do we bypass the banking system? So instead of donating our dollars in the form of checking, savings accounts, CD, money markets, where the banks are not giving us a rate of return that keeps up with the cost of inflation. So what does that mean? If you're right now, according to Go Banking Rate data, the average checking and savings account pays 0.17%. Okay. Not 1.7 or not 11.7, 0.17%
You're
less.
losing money. Right. The inflation is eating your money away.
Yes, yes. And, again, we had the Biden era of historical inflation, but let's
Right.
also just talk about, the 100 years worth of inflation. The average inflation rate is
Right.
3.3%. So we think of, okay, I'm getting 0.17%, but the cost of goods and services are ever increasing at roughly 3.3%. That's not a big deal because we only look at the margin, but we don't think of it as we should like bankers. Instead of thinking like consumers, we need to think how bankers think because bankers make a lot of money, right? So what do we want to do? We want to make a lot of money. We want to have independence. And we want to secure our family. So what that translates to in terms of an internal investment rate of return is negative 1,841%. So every time you deposit money in a checking and savings account, you're getting a negative 1,841% return on your money. Again, I'm highlighting negative. You go to a financial planner, any investment advisor, are they going to tell you to sign up for a guaranteed 1,841% negative rate of return? No, but we do it in droves. So how do you bypass that? Well, with a simple interest line of credit, it works just like a bank account. So instead of putting your money in a checking and savings account where it does nothing for you, you can put it in a line of credit that you own your home. So your mortgage, replace that with a line of credit. Now use that line of credit as your operating account. It is your checking and savings account. So all of your cash flow is going towards it. It suppresses the principal. When you suppress the principal, you reduce time and you reduce the amount of interest that you pay substantially. Our clients going from a mortgage, let's say 25, 27 years left on their mortgage, our average client is paying their home off in 5 to 7 years without changing anything about their existing budget. All we're doing is redirecting the cash flow instead of using the bank's checking and savings accounts, which is designed to separate us from our cash.
Right.
That's why the modern day mortgage, which was created in the 30s, it was designed to separate us from our cash so that we had no other choice but to put money in a form of checking and savings account where they can implode our national deficit, live 10, 15 times more money than they actually have on hand. So you can bypass that altogether, build your equity, but also maintain liquidity and operate inside of it just like a checking and savings account.
Right, because it moves in both directions. It's liquid. You can draw from it, unlike a mortgage.
Exactly. You can build equity in your home, but when it comes to a mortgage, it's a closed-end product. And that's why I call it the modern-day mortgage. It wasn't always that way. Prior to 1913, a mortgage looked just like a home equity line of credit.
I was going to say, because what you're actually talking about is sort of a retraditionalization. You're bringing back the way we used to pay for homes and so forth before the mortgage, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So it became a closed-end mortgage. So you can pay it down, but you don't have liquid access to your equity. Inside of a line of credit, you do have access to it. So you can pay your everyday bills and expenses out of that line of credit while your cash surplus is sitting in there, suppressing the balance, reducing the interest, therefore speeding up the time.
Michael, can you tell us about you have a very unique approach to creating a parallel economy. And I'm just curious if you could kind of spell out for us just a little bit broad brush, how your strategy helps people, like I think you're talking about it, pay off their mortgages, generate passive income, and just basically escape the grip of these predatory financial institutions.
Yeah. And again, it's bypassing the banks altogether. So one, we operate inside of a line of credit. Not 100% bypassing the banks, because who are you getting these lines of credit from?
Sure.
Banks and credit unions, right?
But they don't want to tell you about that part, do they?
No, because it's less profitable for them. Hence, where do profits come from? Profits come from consumers overspending, right? And that's also where commissions come from. When you look in the banking and lending world, mortgages have high commissions. When it comes to lines of credit, there are little to no commissions whatsoever. Why? Because there's no profits. And again, profits come from consumers overspending. So number one, we're going to divert our cash flow into the line of credit. And now it's opened up liquidity. And with that liquidity, we can then fund other products. Like, for instance, I'm a big fan of whole life insurance. You can fund whole life insurance policies that you otherwise may not have been able to afford beforehand. But now you got your hands on tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars that you can fund these policies. And with these policies, you can operate in that no different than you could a checking and savings account as well. So essentially, you now become slowly, to replace your mortgage strategy, you get results 30, 60, 90 days. You're seeing significant impact to the balance that you owe on your home. And yes, it would be nice to be debt free, but then we redirect that liquidity over into these insurance policies, essentially becoming our own family bank. So
Yeah,
that
because they work both ways as well. They're liquid. Is whole life insurance is liquid. Yeah.
exactly. So it's building cash flow. You get guaranteed growth on it. You also have a death benefit. So you're protecting the legacy of your family. When you need to borrow, guess who dictates whether or not you're approved? You. You are the
You.
bank. You're the bank owner, you're the banker, you're the depositor, and you're the borrower. You are all four parties of that transaction. So essentially, we're showing people how to escape the banking matrix altogether. And then with their newfound capital, maybe you invest in real estate for passive cash flow. Maybe you invest in other products. Maybe you invest in yourself. Maybe you invest in your own businesses. Because I know, people ask me the question all the time, what do you invest in? I invest in my business. I get a great rate of return when I invest in myself.
Yeah.
Maybe you should start investing in yourself and building your own economy, your own companies, your own businesses as well.
Yeah, I came across a study years and years ago on it was the question, what is the best investment you can do, and the conclusion was create your own business. That's going to be your highest rate of return. No other investment even comes close. And then once you start getting that cash flow, then you can have all these other investments that you do as well. And then you have your assets and all this passive income. I love the way, is it called infinity banking or infinite banking? Is that the basic structure?
Yeah, infinite banking concepts. And the reason
Infinite
why
banking concepts.
there's infinite ways to leverage this.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about insurance. There are 4 current tax codes that eliminate insurance from taxation. Every time you do your taxes, especially if you're an entrepreneur like myself, you're like, man, I'm overpaying my fair share of taxes all the time. So there are ways to work with inside of the IRS tax code to also simplify your taxation or over taxation and start operating inside of these insurance products. And again, it's not tied to the market. So when you have Biden era years in 2022 and 2023, Fidelity was the largest national holder of 401ks. People holding 401ks, those are tax deferred programs. They're not tax free programs. Well, what happened? You had a 22% dip, which means what you got to have the following year just to get back to square one, greater than 35% return, which doesn't happen.
Right.
So I would rather be in something that can never be taxed again. But to answer your question, it's called infinite because there's so many. It's all based on your creativity of how you use this. You could use it to fund businesses. You could use it to acquire businesses. You could use it to invest in gold or crypto or whatever you want.
Yeah, it's also, and there is that sovereignty there. You're outside of this rigged system that's always trying to keep you basically in debt when all's said and done.
Correct.
So I love it, Michael. I mean, I've always loved your work. It's incredible. And gang, if you don't know, just click on the link below and you'll discover it for yourself. I mean, Michael is offering the ultimate solution to surviving and absolutely crushing it in today's economy by paying off your mortgage in like 5 to 7 years. It's amazing stuff. Let Michael Lush of Replace Your Mortgage and his team help you get started on securing your financial future so you have time to spend doing what you love with the ones you love. It really just does come down to learning these things and then thinking better so you can live better. So click below to get in touch with Michael and his team and get the ball rolling. You are not going to regret it. Michael's the best. And you are the best, my friend. You gave me a nice compliment about my knowledge of finance and so forth. It's because I learned it from you, dude.
Thank you. You're a good student then.
Thanks, Michael. Come on, and don't be such a stranger. Don't you? Come on now. Don't be so arrogant. Come back on the channel anytime.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Steve.
Thank you, Michael.